Why did someone erase an entire island from Noah's old maritime charts? Why do Alaskan fishermen swear they've heard the sea breathe twice? And what did those few who dared to enter that passage actually see? On satellite images, this stretch of ocean looks like nothing more than a blur of gray waves between the rocky edges of the Kodiak archipelago. But in mid-20th century naval maps, something else appears. A small nameless island, split by a narrow channel between two cliffs. Next to it, scribbled in red pencil, the Drowned Passage, restricted zone. Today there's nothing there. Even Google Ocean leaves a blank space, as if someone cut out a piece of the coastline. No coordinates, no topography, just a void where land should be. Yet fishermen along the Kenai coast still tell stories. On quiet nights, they hear a low hum coming from the south, like something vast exhaling beneath the waves. They call the place Raven's Cross. The Tlingit elders refuse to speak its name aloud. In their language, it's Zat-Gaz-I, the sea that breathes twice. According to legend, when the tide changes, the water there doesn't simply flow, it lives. It inhales, exhales, and sometimes it takes back what doesn't belong to the living. The first written mention of Raven's Cross came from a whaler named Jonas Everett in 1854. In his ship's log, he wrote, "When the fog rolled off the sea, we heard it. Not wind, not tide. The sea itself was humming, as if remembering." 3 days later, Everett's ship, the Aurora Belle, vanished without a trace. No wreckage, no crew. Only a lifebuoy washed ashore with the words, "Let it breathe," burned into the wood. In the archives of the U.S. Coast Guard, I found several navigation reports from that same region. Compasses spinning wildly. Radio static cut by a single, long tone that sounded almost like a human voice underwater. The coordinates were always the same. A location marked area B14. And then, after 1958, the zone simply disappeared from official records. Why would the U.S. Lighthouse Board fund a beacon in a place no ship dared to approach? Why build light where every compass spun mad? And even the locals whispered to stay away. What were they trying to illuminate, the ocean, or something inside it? In the spring of 1904, the wreck of Aurora Belle still haunted the northern waters. The whaling ship had gone down off the unnamed island 2 years earlier. 11 men vanished, their bodies never recovered. Only 2 survived, one delirious, the other blind, both insisting that a white shape had risen from the sea moments before the hull split in two. The U.S. Navy called it superstition, but pressure from the shipping companies forced action. The Bering Strait was growing busier, and the coast between Kodiak and the Aleutians was littered with reefs and fog. A lighthouse was proposed, Beacon 17, the first permanent structure on what the charts now called Raven's Cross Island. The project was given to Henry Lowell, a 36-year-old civil engineer from Boston, a rational man, a graduate of MIT. He'd built lighthouses from Maine to San Francisco and laughed at northern ghost stories. His letters to his wife describe him as confident, even proud. "By autumn the beacon will stand. No curse, no legend can frighten iron and mortar." Lowell arrived in June with 22 men, carpenters, stonecutters, and sailors recruited from Seward. They set up camp near the narrow channel where the currents clashed, a place the locals avoided completely. Within days, the crew began to complain about the noise. Not the wind, not the waves, but a low pulsing hum that rose from the water at night, like a great bell tolling under the sea. On June 19th, a worker named Patrick Hale fell from the East Ridge. Witnesses said he screamed only once, then silence. When they found his body, his face looked calm, not contorted in pain, almost peaceful. 2 days later, another man, Elias Brome, vanished. his body washed ashore 4 miles north, lungs full of seawater though his boots were dry. Lowell began keeping a private log apart from the official report. In the margins of his plans he wrote, "Not the wind, something breathing beneath." Still, he continued the work. He doubled the wages. The men stayed, frightened but desperate for pay. Then, in early July, 3 more disappeared during a night shift. Their tools were found stacked neatly beside the scaffolding, lanterns still burning. By July 9th, 6 men in total were gone. The remaining crew refused to climb the cliff again. They said they'd seen figures on the rocks, men without faces, standing knee-deep in the surf though the tide was low. Lowell radioed Anchorage for reinforcements. The message reached the mainland, but no reply ever came back. On the 10th, the barge that brought supplies was spotted adrift near the channel, its deck empty. Only the logbook remained, soaked and smeared with ink. The final entry, in Lowell's own hand, read, "The current changes 3 times each day. We thought it was a tide, but it breathes in rhythm. It's not a passage. It's a gate." After that, nothing. The storm that hit the following night erased every trace of the camp. When a rescue vessel arrived a week later, the scaffolding was gone, tents shredded, and the stone foundation cracked clean in half, as if from below. The official Navy report listed the cause as structural failure during severe weather. Unofficially, the site was declared unsafe for construction. Unstable geological formation. No lighthouse was ever built on Raven's Cross. But for decades afterward, sailors claimed that on certain foggy nights, a faint light still blinked between the cliffs. Steady, deliberate, like a beacon trying to guide something out. Why would one of Harvard's brightest minds lead his students into a place erased from every map? Why did he write about lights beneath the water, then vanish without a trace? In the summer of 1933, Professor Joseph Marlowe, an ethnologist from Harvard University, set sail from Seattle with 5 assistants and a photographer. Their goal was simple on paper: document the oral traditions of the Tlingit people along Alaska's southern coast. But in Marlowe's private correspondence to a colleague, he hinted at something else. Local legends describe a singing strait where the dead return to the sea, the same area the Navy still calls Raven's Cross. I intend to find it. The group established their base on the northern cliff of the island that no longer existed on official charts. Marlowe's field notes described the landscape in precise detail. Basalt columns like cathedral walls, black sand, and a stillness that feels observed. For 3 weeks they collected myths from nearby villages, stories of the Singing Passage, a place where the spirits of drowned sailors walked into the surf when the moon was new. On August 24th, they decided to camp near the channel itself, against every warning. The last radio message sent from the island that evening was routine. Weather clear. Setting up instruments. Will continue tide measurements through the night. At 9:12 p.m. According to Marlowe's diary later recovered, they heard it for the first time. A low resonance from the water. Steady, tonal. Almost like a choir without melody. It vibrates through the ground. Students frightened. I tell them it's geological. I'm not certain. The next entry, time 10:45 p.m. was shaky, as if written in the dark. We can see lights beneath the surface. That was the final line. When a Coast Guard vessel reached Raven's Cross a week later, the camp was untouched. Tents intact. Equipment neatly arranged. Food supplies dry. The logbooks, cameras, and Marlowe's diary all remained. But the 6 people who had written them were gone. 9 days after the search began, the bodies surfaced along the northern beach. All 6 lay in a straight line, hands folded across their chests, faces calm as if asleep. None showed signs of injury or drowning. Yet the autopsy found seawater in their lungs, salt content nearly 50% higher than normal for the region. The official explanation: accidental drowning during nocturnal research activity. Unofficially, one Coast Guard officer was heard muttering, "They weren't in the water long. The water was in them." After 1933, no academic expedition ever returned to Ravens Cross. The Harvard archives still list the project as incomplete, materials missing. And in the university's basement storage, Marlowe's last camera reel remains sealed, its film corroded black from the inside, as if something had burned through the emulsion from beneath. Why would the U.S. Navy send men to an island that wasn't supposed to exist? Why did every recording device fail the moment they set foot on it? And what did those soldiers see standing in the surf that night? In 1946, barely a year after the end of the war, the Pacific Fleet began surveying remote Alaskan coasts for potential radar and weather bases. One such location was listed in the confidential Navy Directive PX 41R, uninhabited formation south of Kodiak, previously charted and erased from civil maps. The assignment fell to Captain Edward Ned Hawkins, a disciplined officer, veteran of Guadalcanal and Okinawa. He'd seen men drown, cities burn, and logic bend under pressure. He didn't believe in ghosts. Hawkins led a small reconnaissance unit of 12 Marines, equipped with portable transmitters and photographic gear. They landed on what the coordinates identified as Ravens Cross Island, though the navigator's compass wavered 15 degrees off true north as soon as they entered the fog. By sunset, they had established a temporary base 50 yards from the shoreline. The cliffs loomed above like walls of black glass. Hawkins noted in his field report, "No wildlife, no wind, ocean flat as mercury." That night, just past 0200 hours, Private Samuel Carter, posted on perimeter watch, reported movement near the water. He described what he thought were fireflies drifting through the mist. But when he focused his beam, the lights took shape. Tall, pale figures motionless, standing ankle-deep in the surf, glowing faintly green. There were at least 20 of them, arranged in a line stretching toward the open sea. Carter screamed. The others woke instantly, weapons drawn. Yet when Hawkins reached the shore, the figures were gone. Only the tide hissed at their feet. No tracks, no reflection, just silence. At dawn, Carter was found unconscious near the perimeter line. His pulse was steady, but his hair had turned white overnight. The medic ruled out chemical exposure, frostbite, or shock burns. Hawkins wrote in his notebook, "Skin temperature normal, pupil response sluggish, no memory of event." Over the next 2 days, more oddities appeared. Batteries drained within minutes. Compass needles spun without stopping. Their radio crackled with whispers, a faint, rhythmic pulse that synchronized with the tide. On the third night, Hawkins claimed he heard singing coming from the direction of the channel. Not human, but harmonic, layered, as though the sea itself was resonating. The men stood outside their tents listening, unable to move, until a sudden gust of wind broke the trance. When they returned to the mainland, half the photographs were blank, the rest fogged by a dark halo across the negatives. Hawkins filed his official report as psychological field effect of subarctic magnetic anomaly. But in a second, handwritten memo, sealed under personal, he added one final line: "The place should remain untouched. It resists us. Why do some men ignore the warnings that have kept others alive for centuries? Why did Elias Monroe keep fishing in waters the locals called forbidden? And what did the sea give back when it finally took him?" By 1952, Alaska was quiet again. The war was over, bases were shrinking, and people came north looking for a new start. Among them was Elias Monroe, a fisherman from the Washington coast, a man who believed in work, not superstition. He moved his wife Margaret and their 2 children to a weather-beaten cabin outside Kenai, near a cove where the tides met in restless eddies. The locals told him the area was cursed. An old Tlingit elder visited soon after the Monroes arrived. His face was the color of driftwood, his eyes blind but clear. He stood at the edge of the dock and said quietly, almost pleading, "Don't fish where the sea breathes twice." Elias thanked him politely, but when the old man left, he laughed. Fish were plentiful near that channel. Bigger, fatter, easier to catch than anywhere else. The ocean there was darker, heavier somehow, but Monroe said that was what made it rich. His first week brought a haul worth 2 months' wages. By the second, he was selling to half the coast. Every trip, his nets came up glistening with silver life. Margaret worried. She said the nights felt wrong. Sometimes she'd wake to find Elias sitting upright in bed, whispering in his sleep. Once she caught the words, "They show me the way." He brushed it off, said it was just a dream. But he began to change. He spent longer and longer at sea, sometimes heading out before dawn and returning long after dark. The other fishermen refused to follow him. They said the air near the channel tasted metallic, like blood in the mouth. 2 months later, on a calm February morning, Elias Monroe didn't come home. The Coast Guard found his skiff drifting near the mouth of the channel 3 days later. The nets were full, the deck slick with fish. His hat was still on the seat. Elias was found a week later, washed ashore 6 miles down the coast. The autopsy made no sense. He drowned, but there were no bruises, no broken bones, and his lungs were full of seawater mixed with sand. More than a liter of it. The coroner noted something stranger still. His stomach also contained seawater, as though he had drunk it willingly before he died. In his jacket pocket, the examiner found a smooth black stone, perfectly round and polished like glass. No rock of that kind existed on that stretch of coast. Margaret didn't wait for answers. She burned everything, his clothes, his tools, even the boat. Neighbors said she wept without sound, feeding his possessions to the fire until only ashes and the smell of salt remained. When someone asked why she did it, the old Tlingit fisherman who'd once warned her husband simply nodded and said, "She did the only right thing. She let the sea keep what it took." No one ever fished that cove again. And some nights, when the tide turned and the sea breathed twice, locals swore they could see a lantern far out on the water, rocking gently, as if someone was still working the nets. Why do some places refuse to stay unexplored? Why did a man vanish 30 meters beneath the surface, leaving only his helmet placed neatly on the ocean floor? By 1956, science had replaced superstition, or so people liked to believe. The Cold War made the oceans a matter of strategy, not mystery. That's why Dr. Walter Briggs, an oceanographer from the University of Washington, received government funding to study abnormal subarctic currents near Ravens Cross. On paper, it was just another hydrodynamic survey. In truth, Briggs wanted to debunk the rumors that had persisted since the Harvard tragedy of 1933. He was convinced that strange stories about singing tides and ghost lights were nothing more than misread geology. Briggs's team consisted of 4 researchers and 1 veteran diver, Frank Dorsey, a former Navy salvage specialist. They arrived on July 29th and set up a floating platform over the narrow channel. Instruments showed unstable salinity levels and sudden temperature drops, water colder than it should have been, as if drawn from the deep. On August 5th at 10 a.m., Dorsey suited up for the first deep dive. His task: collect seabed samples and map the topography using a depth camera. The weather was calm, visibility good, sea glass smooth. At 10:17, Dorsey reported over the radio. Descending past 20 meters. Visibility 5 feet. Bottom's rocky, hold on, wait. I see something. Briggs leaned toward the speaker. Describe it, Frank. Rings. Stone rings. Perfect circles made of blocks. Not coral, not natural. Jesus, they're huge. No, 3 of them nested. Like someone built them. Static. Then, there's something in the middle. Looks. The line cut off mid-sentence. At first, Briggs thought it was a cable snag. They waited 30 seconds, then tugged the safety line twice, the signal for Dorsey to respond. Nothing. A third tug, nothing again. When they began to reel in the rope, resistance suddenly vanished. The line came up cleanly severed, as if sliced with a blade. The end fibers were smooth, not frayed, impossible under normal tension. Panic followed procedure. Briggs called for the backup diver, Harold Sykes, who volunteered to go down immediately. At 11:05, Sykes descended along a new guide rope into the cold, green dark. He resurfaced 40 minutes later, shivering despite the dry suit, eyes wide as glass. He's not there, he said flatly. But something is. The stones, they're shaped like steps. And in the center, his helmet is standing upright, like someone put it there. When the crew hauled the object aboard, they found no damage, no tear in the seals. Inside, the helmet was dry. Dorsey hadn't drowned inside it. He'd taken it off. For 3 days, they searched the channel, dragging lines, releasing flares, diving in pairs. They found nothing, no body, no bubbles, no trace. The official university report filed by Dr. Briggs read simply, "Incident classified as mechanical failure due to equipment malfunction." But in his private journal, written in a slanted, trembling hand, Briggs added one final note. "I saw his drawings before he went under. The rings were symmetrical, geometric, deliberate. Someone built them long before we ever came here." He ended the expedition early. Upon returning to Seattle, Briggs resigned his post. When colleagues asked why, he replied only once, "The ocean has architecture. We're just not meant to live in it." I stumbled across this story by accident while browsing declassified NOAA files. One chart from 1946 bore a handwritten note in black ink, "The drowned passage. Avoid entry." When I tried to open the digital copy, it had already been deleted. Later, in Anchorage's physical archive, I found an empty folder labeled "Withdrawn by request of U.S. Navy, 1971. Why would the Navy order a civilian agency to erase an island from its charts? Why has no one spoken about it for more than half a century? In a fishing village south of Kenai, I met an old captain named Benjamin Tully. He told me that, as a young man, he'd seen it once. Calm morning, no wind, and then the sea suddenly sank as if something beneath had inhaled. A moment later, it rose again, heaving like a living chest. "The sea there ain't evil," he said quietly. "It's alive, and it remembers who it's taken." His words haunted me for weeks. I dug deeper and found erased names, missing ships, reports with no signatures or dates. Even Federal Cartographic Archives replied the same way, "No current records found." First, I thought it was folklore, then a clerical error. Now, I'm not sure I want to know the truth, because everything points to one fact: the island existed. And if it's gone, someone made sure it stayed that way. That's where my investigation began. In the blank space on the map, in the place where the sea breathes, and every breath feels like a call. Why would the military return to a place every map already erased? Why did a perfect circle of stone rebuild itself overnight? Stone by stone, as if alive. In 1971, the Cold War reached deep into the Pacific Northwest. The Air Defense Command launched a series of classified construction surveys along the Alaskan coast, searching for sites to install early warning radar. One of those sites carried an old, forbidden name in the margins of the file, Ravens Cross, designation, Tide 9. The mission was assigned to Colonel Raymond Harlow, an engineer with a spotless record. He had built radar domes on frozen ridges, airstrips in volcanic ash, and bunkers that could withstand nuclear blasts. Harlow was a practical man, the kind who trusted blueprints and numbers, not stories. He led a 6-man team onto the island in early May. The weather was mild, skies clear. They set up camp near the base of the northern cliff and began topographic measurements. Everything went by the book until the third day when a surveyor called Harlow to the summit. There, on a flat plateau of basalt, lay a ring of stones, perfectly circular, about 6 feet across. Each stone was smooth and aligned as if carved by machinery. In the center sat a single black rock, rounded, polished like obsidian. "Locals playing games?" one sergeant joked. But Harlow frowned. There were no locals here. The nearest settlement was 60 miles away. He made notes in his log. Structure artificial. Placement deliberate. Possible native origin, though erosion patterns inconsistent. When the geologist in his team ran a composition test, he found that the central stone contained traces of deep ocean minerals, material that could only form under high pressure, hundreds of meters below sea level. That evening, Harlow ordered the circle dismantled for documentation and relocation. The men obeyed reluctantly, kicking the stones aside and rolling the central rock off the edge of the cliff. It vanished into the surf below with a distant splash. At dusk, the camp grew unusually quiet. Radios hissed with faint static, compasses spun erratically. The men heard something between wind and whisper, a low rhythmic hum that came and went with the waves. When they climbed back to the ridge the next morning, Harlow stopped dead. The circle was back. Every stone had returned to its place, arranged in the exact same pattern. The central rock sat in the middle again, still wet, glistening with thin strands of seaweed clinging to its surface. None of the men spoke. Harlow walked forward, touched the stone. It was cold but pulsing, almost imperceptibly, like something breathing through rock. He ordered immediate withdrawal. "Pack it all up," he told his men. "We're done here." Within 48 hours, the team was back in Anchorage. Harlow's official report cited geological instability and poor structural viability as reasons to abandon the site. But in his personal communique to Washington, sent directly to Air Defense Command, he included a single sentence handwritten beneath the typed briefing. "Recommend permanent closure of Ravens Cross sector." At the bottom of the file, a general in D.C. signed his response with one word, stamped in red ink across the page. "Closed." Why send another team when every record says the island doesn't exist? Who were the 5 people flown in under false names with no insignia, no past? And what did they capture on film before the ocean swallowed them whole? By 1975, Ravens Cross had vanished again. From charts, from memory, from conversation. The Cold War was still running hot, but officially, the island was a restricted environmental zone. That phrase usually meant one of two things: nuclear waste or something worse. Yet in late April, people in the fishing town of Homer noticed something unusual. 2 unmarked helicopters flying south at low altitude, escorted by a Navy transport. The weather was calm, no scheduled drills. The aircraft turned toward the sea and disappeared into fog. The next day, word spread quietly. The military was back on Ravens Cross. Fishermen who worked the coast saw a temporary pier appear near the cliffs, and lights flickering at night, white, not orange, like fluorescent arcs moving under the surface. One man claimed he saw figures walking along the ridge, wearing white suits that glowed faintly blue in the moonlight. No one knew who they were. But according to a local supply contractor, the order for equipment came through a defense liaison under the code Project Ocean 9, with materials labeled Classified Hydrological Monitoring. The manifest listed no agency, no point of contact, only 5 names, all pseudonyms. Among them, Dr. Alan Greaves, physicist, radiation research; Dr. Tessa Quinn, marine biologist; Dr. Owen Reed, sonar systems; Lieutenant Samuel Price, logistics officer; Agent R. Connors, designation unknown. Locals said they worked silently, always escorted by Marines, setting up antenna-like structures along the coast. They drilled small holes into the rock and lowered cylindrical probes into the water. Every night, a humming sound filled the air, a deep, low vibration that carried for miles. On May 11th, a storm hit unexpectedly. It wasn't large, but it came with strange lightning. Flashes that didn't descend from the clouds but seemed to rise from the sea upward. The fishermen watching from shore said the water glowed faintly green, like phosphorescence stirred by something enormous. The next morning, all the lights on the island were gone. The radio channel the group had been using, coded Delta 14, went silent. A Navy vessel reached Ravens Cross 4 days later. What they found looked like an abandoned film set. The tents were still standing. The generator was running. Coffee sat cold in metal cups. But there were no people. All notebooks, field logs, and identification tags were missing. Only fragments of printed readouts remained. Thin ribbons of paper filled with columns of numbers, ending abruptly in a single typed line. Anomaly confirmed. Readings off scale. The island was sealed off again. The government issued a statement to the press calling the story unfounded rumor. When a journalist from Anchorage Daily News filed a Freedom of Information request, she received a single-page response. No such operation existed, and that should have been the end of it, except 3 months later, a pair of fishermen dragging nets near the Kenai coast caught something strange. A plastic storage container, scorched at one end as if from heat, wrapped tightly in wire. Inside were 3 undeveloped rolls of Kodak film, still sealed in their metal canisters. The men brought it to a local photo shop in Seward. The owner, thinking it was a lost tourist roll, developed it overnight. What appeared on the negatives nearly made him quit the business. The first frames were normal, cliffs, tents, men in suits checking equipment. Then, on the second roll, the images began to blur, motion streaks, vertical lines, interference patterns. The sea glowed white. Figures stood waist-deep in the surf, silhouettes of people facing the water, but their heads were tilted backward, mouths open as if singing. In the final sequence, the film turned nearly black, save for faint luminous shapes below the surface. Tall, human-like outlines, arranged in a perfect circle, holding hands. The light came from within them, pale and cold, casting shadows upward onto the waves. When the Photoshop owner returned the developed prints, men in dark coats visited him the same evening. The next day, he closed the store for renovations and never reopened. The fishermen never saw the container again. But rumors spread, and one copy of the photo, grainy, half-burned, made its way to a small Alaskan newspaper. It ran only once on page 6, beneath the headline, "Unknown lights reported near restricted coastline." The photo showed little more than a blur of water and faint halos. But if you looked closely enough, just before the grain swallowed the image, you could make out 5 small shapes in the center of the ring, standing still as if waiting for something to rise. Why did I come back? Why stand at the edge of the same water that erased maps, men, and memory? Maybe because silence isn't proof of safety. It's only the sea holding its breath. It's been 50 years since the last official report from Raven's Cross. The world moved on, wars ended, satellites mapped every corner of the earth, and no one remembered the island that wasn't there. But the fishermen never forgot. When I arrived at the Kenai coast last month, the docks were nearly empty. Most of the old boats were gone, replaced by tourist charters and research vessels. But a few gray-haired men still mended their nets at dawn, and when I asked about the place the charts no longer showed, their hands froze mid-motion. One of them, Captain Lorne Sutter, looked at me for a long time before speaking. "In calm weather," he said, "you can hear it, the underground singing, like the ocean's got a throat." He told me that every few years, when the tides align just right, the water out by Raven's Cross goes perfectly still. No waves, no wind. And then, from below, a low hum rises, steady as breath. It lasts for minutes, sometimes hours. The locals call it the breathing tide. I thought it was just a story until I met Ethan Walker, a 19-year-old hobbyist who spent his nights flying camera drones over the coast. He'd been posting eerie footage of abandoned bunkers, empty coves, old Navy ruins, chasing myths for clicks. A week ago, he told me he wanted to fly into the gap between the cliffs where the water boiled in strange currents. He streamed it live on YouTube. For the first 6 minutes, it was just waves and static. Then, faintly, a glow appeared under the surface, pale and circular, expanding outward like a ripple in reverse. The sound came next, low, harmonic, impossible to place. The viewers heard it through his mic, a note so deep it made the audio crackle. Ethan said, half laughing, "You hear that? It's singing." Then the screen tilted, just ocean and sky, and froze. The stream cut out. The drone's GPS stopped transmitting. His friends found the controller on the rocks, still warm. The screen showing signal interference source unknown. Ethan never came home. The video stayed online for 2 hours before disappearing. YouTube flagged it as removed for violation of community guidelines. Every re-upload vanished within minutes. Only short clips remain, reposted by strangers, blurred frames of flickering shadows below the surface, like something shifting under glass. 2 nights ago, I took a boat out alone. No wind, no waves, just that endless gray sheet of sea. I stopped the engine near the old coordinates. The compass needle spun once, then stilled. At first, I thought it was my imagination, a faint vibration under my feet. But then I heard it, the same low, rhythmic hum the old men described. It rose from below, slow and deliberate, like a giant's breath echoing through stone. The air trembled. My chest felt heavy, as though something was pulling the sound through me instead of around me. I didn't record it. Couldn't. Some part of me knew it wouldn't matter. When I reached the shore, the world felt wrong. Too quiet, too clean. I stood on the cliff where the old lighthouse was never built and watched the water pulse once more, faintly glowing in the dark. And then I realized it wasn't fading. It was getting louder. The hum had become a heartbeat, deep, steady, rising from the earth itself. I'm writing this now because I know what it means. It's breathing again. And I know it's not the sea.